Hello. My name's Paul, and I'm a writer. Now, if that sounds suspiciously like somebody introducing themselves to a 12-step recovery meeting, that's probably quite appropriate. Because, you know, in some ways, writing could be seen as a kind of dysfunctional behavior, especially by anyone who's ever tried to have a relationship with a writer. So please do remember this vital piece of advice when dealing with the average writer. Try not to call them average to their face. They really appreciate it. And if writing in some ways is like a kind of addiction, then for many writers, the drug of choice is narrative itself. For other writers, the drug of choice is drugs. And this is a theme that I touch upon in my latest novel, which is called Dead Writers in Rehab. And there's some copies, I think, available over there. And if you buy one, I'll sign it. Or you can get it from the multi-tentacled corporate global giant squid that shares a name with the South American river. Or here's a better idea. Why not order it from your friendly local bookshop and support independent businesses in your area? That would be great. Even if you don't buy my book, do that anyway. Okay, so before I wrote Dead Writers in Rehab, I wrote a novel called Utter Folly. And before that, I wrote for radio and television, and I wrote films, and I wrote plays, and a variety of other things, and sometimes I even accidentally made a living from it. And much of what I did, not all of it, but much of what I did was comedy. And I wrote a lot of comedy. And over those long years, I've gleaned a piece of advice that I'm going to share with you. If you're a funny sort of a person, and you make all your friends laugh, and they all say, you should be a comedy writer, forget it. Comedy writers don't have friends. But this invaluable nugget of advice does bring me on to the main topic of my talk tonight, which is all about advice for writers. And it poses the question, can creative writing be taught and learned? And I'm calling the lecture The Writer's Journey and How to Avoid It. So, writing advice. There's a lot of it about, but does any of it work? Can you actually learn writing, creative writing, from tips and books and creative writing workshops and university courses? Some people say yes. Other people denounce any attempt to teach creative writing as a kind of outrageous, unprincipled confidence trick. Because writing is a lonely, anguished struggle unless you're doing it wrong. Believe me. So let's try to get to the bottom of this vexed question. Okay, I've been aware, like everyone else, that for many years there's been a lively trade in self-help books. And we all know that there are whole sections of bookstores devoted to titles like The 7 Habits of Highly Decisive People, and the second edition, which was called No, Wait, Make That 8, or maybe 6. Or books like The Power of Positive Persistence. Unfortunately, I didn't finish that one. But, there you go. You'll get there. But of course, what turned self-help into a massive global industry was, of course, the internet. And if there's one demographic that's ideal for online self-help, it's writers. People who are not only pathologically needy and insecure and egotistical, but also constantly looking for any excuse to avoid doing any work. And sure enough, I mean, it's a perfect storm. And sure enough, right now there are thousands and thousands of writers busy writing lists of rules about how to be a writer, instead of obeying what should be rule number 1 on any list of rules about writing, which is stop writing lists of rules about writing and get on with some writing. But there's something I've noticed about this, and that is that the more successful, what I've really noticed about this is that most of this stuff, the more I saw of it, writing advice, the more I saw of it, the more I thought it's actually all rather serious, rather humorless, rather solemn. And it seems that quite a lot of writers do take themselves very seriously. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me be clear. I think if you want to write, you should take it very seriously. I try to take my work very seriously. What I try to take a bit less seriously is myself, especially when it comes to giving advice, because there is always the risk that you come over as a giant pompous dick. And I've noticed that the more successful a writer gets, the greater this risk becomes, because those writers start getting written about and they start getting profiled and interviewed and asked to hold forth on topics that they don't know anything more about than anybody else. It's like musicians. I mean, just because you love somebody's music, it doesn't follow that they know anything worthwhile about the impact of Brexit on the British fishing industry. There again, neither does anyone else. But don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that writers shouldn't express political opinions. I believe that, for example, Martin Amis has as much right to air his views on street crime in Hackney as any other elderly white millionaire living in Manhattan. But there's another issue here as well. And it made me think, look, if you really had cracked the secret of success, not just in writing, in any field, would you really publish it in a book and say to people, here you go, give me a tenner, and I will give you the recipe for the secret sauce so that you can do what I do and put me out of business? I don't think so. I think you'd be more likely to give people deliberately misleading advice, which is exactly what I've been doing. Not just now. Quite a while ago, I created a persona called the writer type. So like a sort of alter ego. And I used this persona as a platform from which to dispense writing tips. Here's an early example. When in doubt, begin with a sex scene. Then do some writing. I began writing these tips for in a column for a publication called Scriptwriter magazine. And when that folded, quite possibly as a direct result of my involvement, I migrated to the digital world. So now, for example, I'm on Twitter. There I am on Twitter. And although I tweet about a number of topics and a variety of different things, I do put a lot of my writing tips out. Can you read that one? Oh, yes. That's this week's pinned tweet. It just says, confuse future archaeologists by burying your pets in elaborate military uniforms. So, I do quite a lot of tweets that are these writing tips. Let me just do a couple of them. Here you go. Let's see what the next one is. Write about what you know. Everyone knows that. But as if you were someone who knows a lot more than you and is a much better writer. Okay? Here's another one. Always back up your work regularly in case you lose it before you have time to decide it's complete crap and delete it. And here's another one. Don't waste time being jealous of more successful writers. Focus on your task of sticking pins into little wax dolls of them. Now, I like to think that these tips aren't just for writers. I think everyone can relate to them, especially things like this one, for example. Don't allow your day to slip away aimlessly. Get organised and waste time according to a strict schedule. I like to think we can all relate to that, because it's basically this sort of thing, really, as I said, it's not just for writers, it's for anyone who spends a lot of time in front of a screen putting words together for whatever reason, which actually is pretty much all of us these days. So I do think they are general. There's one more here. Oh, yes. This is a general one as well. If people say you live in your head too much, don't worry. Those people also live in your head. Right, I mean, I've got a ton of these, and I'll put a couple more up later on. But for now, I just wanted to mention for now that I also have started podcasting. Now, I know I've come to podcasting rather late, but the truth is, it's only quite recently that I got around to actually listening to any podcasts. And when I listened to podcasts, I thought, wait a minute, this is just a bunch of people talking. I can do that. But a lot of the podcasts I listened to were rather long and a bit rambling and waffly and chatty, and I thought that's for my taste. So my podcasts are short. The first episode, which is up, available now, is 17 minutes long, and they're tightly scripted. But there's something else that I'm trying to do with them as well. Because you may have noticed in some of these tips that I've been sharing, a certain hint of sourness, perhaps. Yeah. And when you listen to the podcast, what you realize is that a narrative develops and tells a story. And as you listen, you realize that the person behind that story is, in fact, a bitter, twisted, failed writer whose lack of success has driven him insane. It's an old picture of me. And so what begins in these podcasts as a kind of, a light-hearted satire on self-help for writers, it evolves into a paranoid, deranged rant by the type of writer who believes that there are only 7 basic plots, and they are all plots against him by a jealous literary establishment in order to stifle his gigantic talent. So, completely fictional character, obviously. But this does bring us back to the question. When people give writing tips and writing advice and write books or run workshops or university courses, are they any good, and can we actually learn anything? And my answer is, to both questions, a qualified yes. Because, writing's difficult. Really, ask any writer. And if you don't wish to discuss the existential futility that makes a hollow mockery of all human endeavor, then don't say good morning in the first place. But we need all the help we can get. But we've got to be clear about what can be taught and learned and what can't be. And I believe that what can be taught and learned is craft, and what can't be is pretty much everything else. Because look, there are fantastic, great painters who never had a lesson in their lives. There are gifted musicians who don't read music or write music. But that doesn't mean they never learned anything, just that they learned it in a different way. But for most of us, having some kind of guidance, study, and instruction and analysis could probably help us do what we want to do better. And for me, there are only 2 criteria that really matter in any attempt to teach people how to write. And the first one is, does it help you find and develop your own individual voice? And the second one is it of any practical use? Okay, I've got to make a full disclosure now, because I actually run writing workshops on a number of different topics. But if you come, for example, to my comedy writing workshop, I won't promise that I can make you funny. For all I know, you might already be funny. But I can't make you funny. But what I will claim I can do is help you become a better comedy writer. If for no other reason than over so many years, I've read so many scripts, and I've watched and heard so much comedy, and I've written so many scripts, and I've thought about it so much, there must be something I've learned that I can pass on to you that will help you. That's all I'm saying. I also do script consultancy with an organization called Euroscript, and that means giving people feedback on their scripts. And some writers say they don't want or need feedback, because what they do is they give me a script and they say, here you go, that's the 3rd draft. And I say, great. So you've had 3 sets of feedback on this script. They go, no, I wrote it and I put it aside, and then after a while I reread it, and I made lots of changes. And I did that 3 times. And I have news for that person. What you've been doing is not writing new drafts. What you've been doing is dicking around with your first draft. Because until you've given that script to somebody else, and they've given you feedback, and you've then rewritten the script as a result of that experience, it's still your first fucking draft. Even if you don't agree with any of the feedback, just figuring out why you don't agree with it is going to be instructive. It's something we all have to do, and it's a lesson I keep having to teach myself over and over again. Because every time I start a new project, I think, aha, I finally learned enough to write the final draft first. So I hand my script to someone for feedback. Because I think, obviously, I'm imagining that they'll say, I love it, it's perfect, don't change a word. Only to be given a bunch of notes about how it could be improved. And bugger me, they're usually right. Not necessarily because that person is a better writer than me or smarter than me, but because they have one huge advantage over me, and that is they are not me. They can see what I can't see, and I'm constantly doing, oh, why didn't I see that? Some other writers say that they will be very happy to have feedback, but they want to get feedback from their friends. Okay? That is fine. I have one thing to say to that. Only ask your friends for honest feedback on your work if you're prepared to change one of 2 things. Your work or your friends. Thank you, that's it. Right. No, it's not it. Okay. Now look, I'm going to try and wrap this up now. Very quickly, I'm going to wrap this up. Look, when I do all my writer-type tips and those bogus writing advice and deranged writer stuff, I'm not mocking the hard work and the passion that people put into their writing. It's the opposite. What I'm ridiculing is the idea that there are shortcuts and tips and nostrums that will make that hard work any easier. But I'm also not saying we shouldn't try to help each other. The impulse to help and offer advice is one of the most profoundly creative expressions of the human spirit. And so, unfortunately, is the impulse to talk bullshit. So you've got to try and figure out which is which. For me, it's very, very easy. Here's the secret. The secret of good writing is very simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. All you have to do is want to write more than you want to do anything else in the world. More than you want a relationship, money, success, friends, a home, even a family. Seriously. Listen, you can want those things as well, but you've got to want to write more. There it is. I didn't say it was going to make you feel good as a secret, but that is pretty much what it is. And I'm going to leave you with one final piece of writing advice or a writing tip. It's in 4 parts, and it kind of summarizes all the joys and the frustrations of the writing life. And here it is. We know this. Writing is rewriting. Or maybe it should be good writing is rewriting. Now wait, what about the best writing is? No, fuck it. The first version was fine. Thank you. Thank you.